So, content. Glossary of common terms could be the first one, so that we're all on the same playing field. Everyone is referring to the same definition, so no one's getting confused back and forth. Background on RPE and RIR. What's better? How we implement these two, low prescription tools, and then some limitations of the two. Sweet. So abbreviations and common terms. This is stuff that we are all fairly familiar with, i.e. reps, the amount of times an exercise has been completed, steps collected for a certain amount of reps, volume. So this is maybe a little bit more. When I say the volume, I'm going to be looking at the total reps by sets in a session or a training block. So say 3 by 10 is a total of 30 reps. So that's a volume for whatever that exercise may be. The intensity is a dictated intensity of that exercise. So when we look at running, that can be a percentage of max heart rate. It can be an RPE. It can be how fast you're running, all that sort of stuff. With weight training, it can be the velocity of the barbell. It can be the percentage of 1RM, percentage of 5RM. It can be RPE. And it can also be reps in reserve. So stay with me. We'll get into that a little bit more. So RPE is a rate of perceived exertion, and RIR is our reps in reserve. So the amount of repetitions that can be completed at the cessation of a set. So we've all gone through, finish a set and say a big workout, and you're finishing purposely just shy of failure. So you're leaving 1 to 2 reps on the tank so that you can recover a little bit quicker and get more out. Because we know that if we go straight to failure on the first set, we can be cooked moving forward. So RM, rep max, percentage of 1RM, percentage of 1 rep max. Auto-regulation is this practice of modifying the intensity and volume of our program sessions or our training based on our recovery levels, our readiness to train, and the amount of stress that we are currently under. When I reference periodization, that's just how we plan training. So it's planned fluctuation, volume, and intensity in preparation for an event, test, or something that we want to do. So we can play with these two parameters being volume and intensity quite effectively to get you ready or to put you through a harder session or harder block, depending on what we want to achieve in that block. So a brief background and explanation on rate of perceived exertion and reps in reserve. So initially, this is what RPE looked like. It was a scale of 6 to 20. Okay, and that 6 to 20 indicated our heart rate. So 6 would equal 60 BPMs, beats per minute, and 20 would indicate 200 beats per minute. So it's not very intuitive, and people don't really know where their heart rates are. If you've got a heart rate monitor, you can use this and you can sort of use this to gauge where you're at, but it's still not that accurate because not everyone's max heart rate is going to be 200. Okay, this was more dedicated to aerobic fitness than anything else, and it hadn't really been developed or thought of for anything other than running, so to speak, or even maybe cycling to some extent. So it sort of ran to some box there. Moving forward in 82, we saw the development of the category ratio scale. This is that modified scale from 0 to 10, which is much more commonly seen today, or an abbreviation of this. Okay, this allowed a more universal gauging of effort, and it still wasn't used in strength training. Okay, the reason why it wasn't used in strength training was because it was deemed unreliable and it didn't have a high level of precision, and so this was quite questionable and sort of brought into thought a few other things that were going on. So this was there primarily to assess our cardiovascular strain or how hard we were working, running or aerobically or anaerobically to some point as well. So then we move forward and we move through to what's called the Omni scale, which was developed in 2003 by Robertson colleagues. So this is where we can start to gauge the level of strength training. So it's specifically designed for resistance exercise. There's simply an addition of some really simple descriptors, so like extremely easy all the way through to extremely hard. Was that extremely hard or extremely easy, and how did that go? Okay, this was still lacking some inherent inaccuracies, and it wasn't that good at this stage because there wasn't a whole lot of research behind it, and no one had really figured out how to use it just yet. So as you can see, this is taking 2003 from 82, just over 30 years to really get some traction and get moving forward. So then we look at the addition of reps in reserve to RPE and how that works. So Zordos and colleagues then paired this reps in reserve with RPE in a study to provide greater accuracy to the perceived intensity. So your RPE score of 10 RIR or description would be maximal effort. You can't get any more reps out. You can't do any more load. That is it. You're cooked. Done. No more. Come down to 9 RPE, so 9 out of 10. We're looking at 1 rep in reserve, so we can sort of see how those two figures are inverse on a scale of 1 to 10. So as we go to 10, that's a 0 rep in reserve, 9, 1 rep in reserve, 8, 2 reps in reserve. And then as we get lower down that RPE score, it gradually becomes a little bit less accurate because there is more noise occurring there. Okay. And by noise, I mean type of exercise, the load, metabolic fatigue, cardiovascular strain, all that sort of stuff. Initially, this was done on bodybuilders where reps in reserve were estimated with a high degree of accuracy. So the bodybuilders would go through their set, they'd estimate where they were at 7 RPE and how many reps they had. So the bodybuilders were able to sort of gauge how accurate they were or how far from failure they really were in those sets and have a good level of accuracy with the RPE and reps in reserve. And this is where we start to see the development of reps in reserve and RIR together. So as in this table, this slide here, all I want this to do is to sort of show the progression as we come from very early on, sort of in the 70s, 80s, all the way through to what we have today, which was adopted in 2016, and what we're going to be using moving forward. Now, the real beauty of this I'll touch on later is its ability to adapt to everyone's readiness or how they feel on the day, which is very subjective, and there's an argument for and against that. But there's also a very big positive for that, and I'll touch on that later. So this video here is to try and give you guys a gauge of, or get you to estimate where it's at. So I want you to, we're going to watch this video and go through it. I'm going to pause it, give you maybe 10 seconds, have a guess of what you think it is. Feel free to have a laugh at me as well. So this was during isolation, and we'll go from there.
Come on, first one, let's go. There you go, come on.
Easy, come on.
Get it? Come on.
Yes.
You got this, man, come on.
Keep your chest up.
Come on. Get up.
That's it. Keep your
Nice.
chest up.
Finish it now, come on.
Come on!
One more. Chest up, chest up, chest
Get
up.
it, get it.
Go on, come on.
That's right!
Right, that is a 5 RM.
Yes. Oh.
Yes. Oh.
So before I go any further, you heard one of the guys in that just say that was 5 RM, which it was. I'm going to press play again. I want you to have a guess of what RPE you think that was, and then now you'll probably get some confirmation.
I did it.
Look at your face, bro. Oh, that's tears.
Yeah.
So for reference, that it was a 5 RM for me, and I've been working towards that weight for about 6-7 weeks and constantly trying to get towards it. So that was a big win for me in my training program. So you can see really how hard that was, and that's a good example of what sort of a 10 RPE or 0 reps in reserve looks like at 5 reps. So RPE versus RIR, they're very similar tools that achieve very similar outcomes. One method may make more sense to individuals versus the other, i.e. you may be able to understand rate of fatigue exertion a little bit easier than reps in reserve. But on the same hand, you may be someone who understands reps in reserve, or it's a little bit more intuitive to you and just how we perceive it. And that's completely personal. And that's why I try and provide both so I can get both people involved there as well. So when we use it separately, it can have different effects. However, together they work towards the same outcome. So RPE can be a little bit more ambiguous at some points, as can reps in reserve for certain people, as I just touched on. But if I combine the two together, it means both parties have a very, very good idea of what we want to achieve at the end of each step, at the end of each workout. Okay. There is, however, the greater utility of RPE in estimating training loads and controlling more technical aspects of periodization, which are outlined through the presentation. So I'll touch on that very quickly. I'm not going to go into any more. If we want to look at a training load, whether that's strength, conditioning, a pack march, like a tactical session for rugby, so we're doing like a captain's run, we can do how hard that session was on a scale of 1 to 10. And let's just say it was 6, and how long that session went for. Let's say 60 minutes. So 6 times 6 is 36. That's a training load of 360. And that may not mean much, but over the scale of a whole week, we can look at training loads and we can add them up if we do double day or 2-a-day sessions, and we can start to look at how hard people are training on a daily, weekly basis. And then we can look at strain and other things as well, which indicate risk of injury. I mean, what we want to try and do, or my job is really, is to reduce the risk of injury and increase your availability, because the best ability is availability. So this dives into that a little bit more, and this gives you that really simple understanding of what RPE rating is related to what reps in reserve. What we can also see here is what I use in the back end is, all right, I know what percentages are relative to certain, adaptations or stimulus, and I know what ranges are there as well. So what rep ranges, i.e., I'm not going to get someone to do any power work, anything more really than 5 reps. Anything more than that, and you're sort of losing power, and you're going to see the ability to produce force decline gradually. So here we have that RPE rating. So I know that if I program someone a set of 3 to 85%, as you can see just here, bang, bang, it's going to be an RPE of 8. So we should realistically have 2 reps in reserve. So someone can build up and say that they get to 80% for a set of 3, and they feel like at the end of that set, they've only got 2 reps in reserve. Cool. Let's keep the weight at 80% and stick to that 2 reps in reserve. So we can use this as, say, a speed limit. When the weather's good, there's no traffic, all that sort of stuff, we can do the speed limit, or we can go a little bit quicker than the speed limit if we know there's like hops around. Okay. But when the weather's shit, there's lots of traffic, it's very congested, we don't necessarily do the speed limit because the environment doesn't allow for it. And that's the same with us. If we feel run down, there's lots of stuff going on, it's just very cloudy, not covered well, then we're not going to try and do the speed limit because we're not there yet. We don't have the ability to do that. So let's get to a point that feels like the speed limit, what it should feel like normally, and just hang there. And that's still going to produce the same adaptation because our ability to perform on a daily basis can fluctuate up to 36%, being 18 plus and 18 minus. So how do we implement rate perceived exertion and reps in reserve? Well, we can use basic load prescription with RPE, auto-regulating volume, total reps and rest pause, tracking progress and predicting 1RM, and progression scheme with RPE. So I'm going to delve into these a little bit more now. So basic load prescription with RPE. Simply replace percentage-based load prescription with RPE, i.e. 70% equals 7 RPE. It's really simple. Okay. So Helms and colleagues found that lifters using RPE tended to train at a higher average intensity than percentage-based prescription in an 8-week program. Now, you can argue for and against that. However, if they're being able to maintain a high average intensity across an 8-week program, you can probably elaborate or extrapolate from that the lifters have the ability to do so. So why not go there as long as they're recovering properly? But the fact that they are training at a high average intensity across that program would indicate to me that they were able to recover in between sessions. The total number of reps that can be performed at a certain intensity varies from person to person. So some people can actually go through and complete more than 5 reps at 85%. So that's generally between 84 and 86%. That's roughly where your 5RM is going to fall for the majority of the population. However, some people, and I've coached people like this, who have the ability to do 10, 12 reps at 85%. And that sucks for them because that's a lot of pain. Okay. But that means that if I prescribe sort of 83% for 5, it's going to have a very different effect to that person who can do 85% for 12 versus that person who can only do 85% for 5. So there's a very big difference there. And this is where RPE and reps in reserve can come into play. So the problem with this though is that inexperienced lifters may estimate RPE incorrectly and simply record. So the way they ran this, is to simply record the whole session RPE for 2 to 6 weeks to sort of build their toolbox and to build their accuracy at estimating RPE. So at the end of the session or at the end of the exercise, go, okay, how hard was that? On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard were you going then? And on the back end, for me, what I do is I gradually increase it over those 6 weeks to make sure that sort of around that 4th, 5th, 6th week, I'd be wanting to get a signal, get a response of a 9 RPE. Earlier on, I'd probably be looking to get 6 or 7 RPE. So gradually increase that intensity So that person has something to anchor it to. So when we use load prescription for assistance work, it can be a little bit different. So we can follow a similar RPE framework for the main lifts, but higher reps, because your assistance work is there to assist the main lifts, not to be the main lift. So it's more useful to use RPE ranges such as 6 to 8 RPE for our assistance work, because there's no point going to failure on a cable bicep curl, or there's no point going to failure on a glute bridge, like a lying bodyweight glute bridge assist. It's not going to achieve a whole lot. So we can play around the load and decrease it, and we can play with that rep range from 6 to 8 through to 15 as well if we want to, and we can tailor that. So this is a basic load adjustment chart. If you're sort of missing the RPE range. So if you're going through and you're not sure you're getting it right, we can use this here. So this is for someone moving through actual RPE, all right? And so we're going to say the assigned RPE range is between 6 and 8. So some coaches like to prescribe a range to fall within. I do that from time to time. However, I generally give an RPE and then accept plus minus 1 around that. It's pretty much what's happened here. So I'd prescribe 7, minus 1, 6, plus 1, 8. We're in and around that range. Okay. So if you hit a 5 RPE, you can increase load by about 4%. Okay. Or if you're at 8.5, decrease by 2%. At 9, decrease load by 4%. And this is just sort of a gauge to where you go from. So generally, if this was working to a 100 kilo squat as the absolute max, the 100 kilo squat would be around what would be dictated for the 6 and 7 RPE. Then you can decrease that if you hit it at a 5, increase the load by 5 kilos. And that's going to be about right. Just to give you some wiggle room there. So, how do we auto-regulate volume? It's total number of reps. So this is what we call an RPE stop. There are 2 ways that we can use this. Auto-regulate number of reps in a set, and auto-regulate number of sets in a session for a specific exercise. So, auto-regulating a certain number of reps. Pick a percentage or exact weight and do as many as possible until you reach a predetermined RPE. When you want to do auto-regulation of number of sets, take a certain load, for example 70% for 8 reps. Without deciding how many reps you're going to do in total. Perform as many sets as possible until we reach a predetermined RPE. Now this will be quite good for getting higher levels of volume in. So you can do 70% for 8 and stop, and you continue to do that until the end of that set you're getting towards a predetermined RPE. So for example, that RPE might be 9. Stop it right there, that's it, done. And so week 1 you may only be able to get 3 sets. Week 5, you may be able to get 6 sets. And that's going to be quite taxing for a hypertrophic stimulus. So, total reps for RPE. Using a percentage-based prescription for assistance work can be problematic as we generally don't have monorems or RRMs for these movements, as I sort of alluded to before. Total reps may provide greater utility and accuracy than percentage-based method because those percentage-based method takes percentages of our 1RM and divides it according to what we're seeing generally, so it may not be almost accurate. This is similar to the RPE stop system. Set a total amount of reps at a certain load. Perform as many reps as possible in a single set until you reach a predetermined RPE. Say, for example, I'm going to do hack squat, okay, and I'm going to throw 100 kilos on. I'm going to perform as many reps as possible in a single set until I reach an RPE of 9. So I'm finishing with 1 rep in reserve. Stop, report how many sets it takes me to reach the total amount of reps. So I've got to hit the total amount of reps for that session. So say I want to achieve 50 reps and I've got to stop each set at a 9 RPE. How long does it take me to get to that? And then your progression there can be tracked by the decreasing amount of time and the steps it takes you to get to that predetermined volume. Sweet. So how do we track progress and predict our 1RM using RPE and RR? It takes little to no effort from main lists or within a session. So for example, if I completed 175 for a set of 5, that was a 10 RPE. And then 6 months later, I was able to hit 180 kilos for a set of 5 and an RPE of 8. Clear indication of improvement. Clear. I've been able to increase the load by 5 kilos and decrease the rate of percent exertion by 2. The tracking RPE gives us a clear gauge of how successful our training is over a long period of time. Okay? So what are the drawbacks of RPE and reps in reserve? As I said before, inexperienced lifters' estimation of RPE may be largely inaccurate. When prescribing our RPE ranges, there is a higher risk of load variance. So load can vary a lot more, which is not always ideal. We want to be very specific with our stimulus. This can cause serious over or underreaching volume. If not supervised, we may see athletes seeing high RPEs and deciding to max out all the time. The actual intent would be to leave 0.5 to 1 rep in reserve. There is a massive difference in, let's say, for example, in the strength world, doing 2 reps, leaving 1 rep in reserve, so doing your 3RM versus doing an actual 3RM and getting close to failure. It creates the latter situation creates a much larger fatigue, creates a much larger amount of fatigue, which means it's much harder to recover from. So if we need to save some recoverable energy or some systemic energy for following sessions, then it's not ideal to go to failure each time because we need that energy to flow onto other sessions or other concurrent training. In our instance, for example, if you max out and go to absolute failure in the morning at PT, and then your legs are cooked for the rest of the day and you can't go and shoot properly, you're now ineffective at your job and you can't do your job properly. We need to manage that fatigue early on so that you're still able to do your job, but we're still getting stimulus from that early morning session. Side note, if we know that we've got a very heavy session in the morning, it may be worthwhile to tailor the training during the day to be of lower intensity, lower volume, so that it's not having a sort of interference effect and we're not mitigating the possible adaptation from the important stuff and the accessory work as well. As I said before, high rep sets generally see less accurate RPE. So this is a quote from sort of 2018, which I think is worth touching on. The common critique that RPE is subjective and thus not perfectly accurate is correct. However, the point isn't always to be perfectly accurate. Further, using RPE to predict reps in reserve is quite accurate based upon existing literature during low rep and high intensity sets, which is when accuracy is most important. So when we see low rep, high intensity sets, the potential for overreaching or underreaching or not hitting the required target or stimulus is much, much higher. We need to keep that in consideration because that's when the majority of our strength gains will occur. Not sort of during our lower rep stuff, so the 8 to 10, that's where we're going to get more of a hypertrophy effect. But in those lower rep sets is where we need to be very particular about how we achieve it. There are some references, guys. And what I want you to take away from this big time, though, is that we need to anchor ourselves to a certain movement. And a good way to do that, I've found, is by using sets of 10 in a movement so that we can push to failure there, get some sort of a pump on, and we can feel that that's a 10 RPE for that movement. We get time practicing the movement specific to the gym, specific to that exercise. And that's why we use reps in reserve. So how many reps could you have got out? If you can't get out any more reps, any more load, then that is a 10 RPE. And that's as simple as it is. Hope this has helped, guys. If you've got any questions, send us through an email or touch base with us. And I'll see you around.
Yeah.